Join me, Harriet Gould, for the Lab Matters podcast to hear fascinating stories every week from the inspiring people behind the science. In this episode, I'm joined by scientist turned lawyer Joe Lenthall. Join me to find out why Joe is passionate about protecting scientific creativity. Hello, Joe. Hi. Today we've got Joe Lenthall with us. Now, Joe studied chemistry and biochemistry at university and then got a PhD in supramolecular chemistry. So we could all be forgiven for thinking that Joe might have a research type job in the lab. But in fact, Joe is an IP lawyer and he joins us from law firm HLK. Now it's been quite a journey of discovery for you, hasn't it? And I want to hear all about the role intellectual property plays in innovation. But before we get on to that, I'd like to go back to your scientific origins. Is it right that you initially wanted to be a doctor?
That's right, Harriet. I sort of started off liking to solve problems and wanting to help people. So I kind of thought that medical doctor was the way forward and started to kind of go down that career route. But some might say, luckily, quite early on, I realized that definitely the sights and smells of being a medical doctor and all that associated wasn't for me. I remember seeing someone just cut their finger and feeling very, very faint. I think even just pictures of sort of surgery made me feel extremely queasy. So yeah, I avoided that route and but had that sort of strong feeling of kind of problem solving. So I was quite good at maths at school, and so kind of pursued more, I guess, lab-based pursuits, scientific pursuits.
And so was it? Was that at school, or had you hadn't gone to university yet because you went to Durham? Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So as is quite common with most people, I had a very good chemistry teacher and a very good biology teacher at school, and that kind of formed my opinion as to how to, what to do for university. So I was up at Durham and enjoyed kind of quite a broad, I guess, research career in that time, doing sort of various projects. Some of it was looking at, how polymers interact. Others were looking at how, the blood cells of Soviet workers carrying nuclear weapons were affected, looking at it at a genetic level. And it's not really a spoiler alert, but it's pretty bad for your cells being exposed to radiation, and really looking at kind of how the chromosomes kind of broke and reformed in very bad ways. So that really interested me. And I did, after a short break, I did go and do a PhD. So in many respects, I did get to become a doctor, just a different type of doctor. And anyone listening, I certainly wouldn't recommend doing a PhD just for the title. It's 3 long years of banging your head against the wall from my experience. But no, it was really good, and I really enjoyed my research. But I think one of the things that I found was I liked the breadth of scientific knowledge during that time. And I wrote a review article with my PhD supervisor, and actually found I enjoyed talking about other people's research more than my own. And that really kind of started a different path for me in terms of, I was pretty sure that research wasn't really where I was going to go.
It's so interesting. And I mean, people might like talking about other people's research, but still like doing their own research. But you definitely weren't.
Yeah, I think I can kind of, be fairly honest and say I think I was sort of a fairly average researcher, but I wanted to do something that I was kind of really good at. And I think it played a part that one of our, academics at Durham sort of took us through grant writing process, and that didn't seem particularly fun to me. I think during my PhD, I realized I quite like seeing a correlation between hard work and results. And, the more I did a couple of stints working for technology transfer offices. So that was at firstly at Oxford University and then at the Medical Research Council. And it's there really that I kind of saw that I wanted to look into more the translation and the commercialization of research rather than the day-to-day lab work. Even though, I was and I still really do enjoy, scientific research and the science.
So how were you introduced to those two places? You say the Medical Research Journal. These things don't just come along arbitrarily.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think luck does play a huge part in it. And in fact, the Oxford University job was because my neighbour at the time worked there, and she mentioned it and said that she would, give me the contact details of someone there. And it sort of all fell about from there. And then once I had that sort of under my belt, it was actually, I think, in the back of New Scientist, there was an advert for the Medical Research Council, and I applied and got the job, and spent a nice time there. But again, realized that it was closer to where I wanted to be, but not quite where I wanted to be.
And did you have any people that you could speak to at this time, any mentors from back in the university days that you could check in with and discuss what you might want to do next?
Yeah, it's interesting because the eventual route that I went down, again, it was a bit of luck that I sort of knew about the profession, but it was through these sort of chance encounter, well, the initial chance encounter. But actually, at the time, and this is going back a little bit, I think it wasn't really a very sort of well publicized career. The careers, I remember the careers. I recently did a talk back in Durham last week, actually, to some students, and I said, it seemed like the focus at the time was on management consultancy and accountancy and all those sorts of things, which I think there was quite a big drive for that, and I think the career options were a bit more limited. But luckily, I did get to talk to a few people, and in fact, my PhD supervisor, was always very sort of open and still have a very good relationship with him, and he was very much sort of open to chatting about that, and wasn't scathing about the fact that I was looking to a career outside of academia, which, I'll be honest, maybe it still is, but when I was a researcher, IP and patents was a bit of a dirty word in the UK. So yeah, I was fortunate again that my PhD supervisor was very sort of open and understanding about that.
I wonder what it is that overrode for you it was IP, intellectual property it was important to you and still is, and that was more important than the fact that it was a dirty word. I mean, why do you think it became a dirty word, or was a dirty word then?
I think a lot of kind of scientific researchers are focused on, or at least were in academia, focused on research for, advancing knowledge and that sort of thing, which I think is absolutely admirable. I think the commercialization of research definitely was seen as a bit of a sort of alternative that was less altruistic than the pure academic research. And then, IP is, as we might talk about, a sort of tool for that commercialization. And so, in sort of old school kind of selling out type vibes, it feels, I think at the time it felt like, you've got this great scientific background and you're just going off to help commercialization of that. But I think the attitudes changed a lot in the UK in academia. I do talks at various UK universities, and a lot of the universities realize that we, need to translate this research from, it can't just sit in a journal. And the translation is important, and the people who do that are important. And, I think the US has always been way ahead of the UK in terms of accepting of that. But I'm generally pleased that I think the UK research and academics have come to realize that commercialization of research is not selling out or a bad thing necessarily.
Almost the opposite, means you can get it out there.
It is. I mean, I think, one of the things that I'm always very kind of clear about is that there are some completely blue sky research that has no direct application today, tomorrow, or in 5 years. That's still absolutely fantastic research, and actually will hopefully in 10, 20 years become the foundation of what does. And I think ultimately, in terms of sort of innovation, I'm just keen in whatever way that I can to help innovators kind of get stuff, their kind of innovation to the market and helping people. And I think that is a callback to sort of the medical doctor's way of ultimately, if there's innovation that's helping people, and I particularly kind of work in sustainability areas and healthcare, and that's what drives me, slight sort of purpose driven, which is I think what a lot of people these days look for. But in the smallest possible way, I like the fact that I'm helping in a tiny way to get that that drug to market, because I'm helping to protect it.
I wouldn't call it a tiny way. I think it's quite important, quite an important contribution you make. So I mean, we've talked about this before, about how we think of researchers as creatives. So I mean, let's talk a little bit about the impact that IP has on innovation, and in the context of getting it to market, as you've mentioned already, but also in the context of protecting those creative outputs from those researchers.
Yeah, I mean, I think as we've talked about before, I very much see intellectual property as protecting creativity, and I think society tends to sort of view creativity as the person doing a painting, or the person writing a book, or making music. And I think, of course, those are creative pursuits. But I very much sort of see scientific creativity and ideas as creative as well. And I think, quite a lot of it is the common theme of, I remember from my research, it starts with an idea, that's the creativity, and then it's followed by, an enormous amount of hard work and a lot of kind of logical process and diligence. But it still starts with that creativity and that idea, in the same way that, writing a book or making a painting starts with an idea, and actually there's quite a lot of hard work that follows that and developing of that. So I very much see kind of a parallel. What IP enables the creative person to do is to effectively make sure that, or hopefully make sure that, someone doesn't essentially piggyback on that creativity. One of the benefits of the IP system, and we can talk about pros and cons of the IP system, and as an IP lawyer, you might be surprised that I'm not 100% pro the system. But one of the benefits of the system is it's not, you don't have to do it. You can just publish your work, and put it out there in the public domain, and that is fine. Most people I talk to, though, who are creative, whether scientific or artistically, do tell me that they would get quite annoyed if someone then started benefiting from their creativity. If you've got a great idea, you do all the hard work to do the research, and then someone picks that up and makes money or has an advantage out of that. Most people say, yeah, I'm not that keen on people kind of piggybacking on that. But there are plenty of examples. Elon Musk made a lot of his patents sort of free to use. He's sort of famously and I don't know if he's anti-patents, but he's famously sort of doesn't see much value in patents, and that's reasonable. It's everyone's choice.
And just on that, just for my benefit, as much as anything else, just run us through the difference quickly between intellectual property, patents, and copyright.
Yeah, so intellectual property is the broad umbrella term. So for various different rights that you can get. And roughly they do kind of fall into discrete categories in what they protect. So copyright would roughly be, your artistic works such as books, music, art, paintings, sculptures, etc. But actually also extends to some sort of less artistic ventures, like if you write a manual of your lab code can fall within copyright. The sort of trademarks typically protect your brand, and essentially trademarks are an indicator of origin, so that as a consumer you can go to a shop and you can buy a certain branded biscuit, and every time you sort of have this reassurance that these biscuits are produced by the same people, and you can roughly expect there to be similar quality, and if they're not of the same quality, you can go and tell them that and feedback. Patents are restricted to kind of scientific concepts, and they very much kind of protect the technical concept behind an invention, and that can be anything from really groundbreaking research like CRISPR gene editing to much more less groundbreaking work like making a detergent composition 5% foamier. If it's got a technical kind of benefit, then that can be protected by patents, as long as it's new and not obvious.
And so Elon Musk isn't a fan.
He's publicly not a fan, and I have a lot of respect for him in the sense that I think he is a master of saying some things in public and maybe thinking that having a different strategy in private. But I don't wish to second guess him. I've never met him, and he's got a lot more money than me, so I don't want a defamation suit on my hand.
I understand. So let's talk a little bit more about the impact on innovation. So we talked about protecting the ideas, but let's think about the whole process. So are we enhancing the system? Are we stifling it? What is it, a bit of both? Explain that for us a little bit.
Yeah, I mean it's a debate as old as time, really, or at least until since IP rights have been around. And I think there is a very kind of strong message from some quarters that IP stifles innovation. I'm not suggesting that it doesn't. I think overall, I think the system is there for the benefit of innovation, but I think the system has some quite serious flaws. I mean, the whole point of kind of intellectual property is to grant someone a monopoly, and that is anti-competitive, and that's against the sort of general market economics that I think most economies run to. I think I come back to the fact, and I am biased because I work with a lot of innovators, but it comes back to the fact that without adequate way to protect the investment in that innovation, without being able to have that reward at the end, I do kind of question whether, in fact, there would be as much innovation as there is, because the extreme end are the therapeutic, the drugs that save people's lives, and the cost of developing and bringing one of those to markets is huge. Now, if you're to say that those are developed and then suddenly everyone can also sell them, I suspect that fewer drugs than are needed come to the market.
You're here with me, Harriet Gould, for the Lab Matters podcast. If you like what you hear, please rate us on your favourite podcast platform.
But there are other areas. It's that's quite an extreme example. There have been lots of studies, and it sort of depends on which side of the fence you sit. But there are lots of studies, that IP, in fact, increases innovation, and innovative companies tend to do better and get more investment and that sort of thing. I have to admit, I've never come across a study that I've read that convinces me that one way or the other. I have to say, it's a case of, I think the system is slightly flawed. I think it's too complicated, which means that you've got to have experts like me, which is very specialist knowledge, and that makes it expensive. On the other hand, it tries to be a system that is one size fits all for all company sizes, ranging from bootstrapping startups to multinationals, all technologies from paperclips to gene therapy, and again, that's not ideal, but once you start to think of the solutions, you can divide it up more. Ultimately, you make the system more complicated, and that adds to the expense. And it's difficult because I think, my overall conclusion is that the system isn't great, but no one's been able to come up with a better system. And I think the system needs to be there to incentivize innovation. What I would say is that good people in IP will always question, is the commercial value of your IP really worth spending the money on it? So IP can be quite expensive. As I said, that requires specialist kind of knowledge of the system. And I think, to go off on a bit of a tangent, there's I talk to people who are scientific researchers and say, right, have you actually tried to read a patent, for example? And I say, yeah, it was impenetrable. It was truly terrible. And part of what I like to do is I like to sort of say, okay, well, just stick with the examples. But it's that sort of it unfortunately, patents tend to have to be written in a certain way in order to convey and have the value that they are required to. One of the examples that I give to people is, there's a video that's kind of doing the rounds on the internet of a dad who is receiving instructions from his kids on how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I don't know if you've seen it, but he says, tell me how to do it, and without sort of going through it all, essentially what it says is they say things like, put the peanut butter on the bread. And so he takes the jar and he just slams it on the bread without taking the peanut butter out of the thing. He says, that it's like, well, I did what you said. And the kids are getting increasingly frustrated because he's obviously getting in the way of what, they're essentially saying, what I mean, whatever. But the reason why I'm telling that story is that a lot of kind of patent application language is like that. It's got to be very precise. It's got to be read all over the world by lots of different it's translated in all different languages. And, it's got to be clear enough that ultimately what it does is it both transmits or gives over, the technical meaning of the invention, but also defines the protection that you have in that patent. So yeah, it's hugely specialist. Yeah, a bit of a tangent on that, but it's one of those things which in many ways I wish the system wasn't as complicated, and I wish there could be a bit of what I mean factored into the system, but ultimately it is what it is.
Yeah, it would be a little bit of an easy get around, I suppose, in court if there were too many what I means.
That's the thing, and it's just a balance between rewarding the innovator, the person who's come up with the invention, and the genuine interests of other people and companies who want to know, okay, I can do that or I can't do that. And that's why you need that precision there. But it does make these documents hugely impenetrable, and I think a lot of researchers get frustrated with that, and I can fully understand that.
Yeah, I can too. I don't think, mind you, that it is necessarily a negative thing, because I think it all depends on the person's motivation for the research. For example, if a person is doing what they're doing to make money, and it turns out that they can't do it because there's a patent on it, then yes, they might get frustrated. But if they're doing what they're doing because whatever it is that they're researching is to solve a societal need, then they probably wouldn't start working on it if there was a solution in the first place. So I think it's probably in the round quite a good thing, because it directs that need, and helps people narrow what motivates them.
Yeah, and I think different people have different frustrations. I know that researchers find it frustrating because it might be the protocol that they want to follow is only published in the patent literature, and there's not quite as much detail as a research article. Yeah, I mean, it's not a research article. I mean, quite a lot of sort of researchers in companies do actually then publish their research after the patent applications have been filed, because they're proud of it. I've worked this year with someone who is a leading expert in Huntington's disease treatments, and she's enormously, she's publishing lots of her research and attending lots of conferences because it's important research. It's important to protect the company's kind of assets, but at the same time, they're given a lot of the time they're given the freedom to also publish the research in peer-reviewed journals, which is obviously important for research anyway.
So now you've been doing this for about 20 years now. Is that right?
Yeah.
What, I know you can't talk about things that are on the boil at the moment because they're top secret stuff. But what are some of the things that have come to market that you've been able to see right the way through from that point of patent? Some of the best things, your favorites.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I've worked on a lot of things, which is great, and it's part of why I like the job. I'm trying to think of some of the favorite things. I mean, I think the sort of stuff that has happened recently is some of actually my favorite stuff. So I currently work on kind of the interface between chemistry and biology, the squidgier stuff, as I say, of my chemistry degree. And it typically tends to be therapeutics. So I've worked with, as I said, someone on Huntington's disease treatments, and I think again, the theme of wanting to be a medical doctor when I was younger comes through, because Huntington's disease is a really debilitating and ultimately fatal disease, and there's currently no treatment. And so, seeing that go, I wasn't involved at the early stage with the inventors, but in the latter stage, and You know, that's always exciting to see things go through the clinic. I have been involved in, again, not at the beginning, but in some gene editing therapies. In fact, the first CRISPR edited approved therapy, which was a couple of weeks ago, I'm working on at the moment, or involved in, which is hugely exciting. But I've done all sorts, you know. I think as early in my career, I worked on some more kind of mechanical stuff. There was an invention that was sort of a type of sock that helped people with foot drop, which is an affliction of the foot. And I wasn't involved directly, but a colleague of mine was involved in the Speedo swimsuits that were in the Beijing Olympics, 2008 Olympics, you know, the shark skin suits. And I think it's sort of that, you know, working on technology that's cutting edge, and, you know, there's a fair amount of stuff that you can't really, you know, people down the bar can't really relate to. You know, when I talk to some of my friends about you know, this and that therapy, their eyes glaze over. But there is stuff that's you know, a bit more appropriate, a bit more sort of real world. I mean, I remember there was some trademark work where people from my colleagues were sent to various bars to ask for a martini and to see if they got the cocktail or the branded martini. And so, you know, there's sort of some fun stuff to.
What is it?
I can't off the top of my head remember. I mean, I think it was a mixture, but I think it's that sort of thing of yeah, definitely some of the trademark work is a lot more real world. But yeah, you know, and then there's things like future foods, which I have a particular kind of personal interest in, which yeah, means that, you know, the future of kind of sustainability and all those sorts of themes, which again help, you know, not just do the job, but actually feel like, as again, I know you very kindly said tiny way, not a tiny way, but really, you know, the researchers do the main work and the companies who develop it do the main work. I have a small part, but it is nice to do that because, you know, the job is, you could look at the job as, and I have sometimes described it as a professional letter writer. That's you know, in reality, I sit down and I write letters. But it goes beyond that because it's more, you know, this is how I explain the profession to people who want to come into it. You know, at a simplistic level, I work out what these innovators are doing that's clever, and then I write a document that says how clever it is, and then I try and convince a patent office why it's clever. And there's an element of storytelling in that, and there's an element of you know, seeing beyond just the science and going at it at a much more conceptual and interesting level. So yeah, it's a hugely rewarding kind of job. But you know, ultimately I write letters.
But the good thing is about it that you understand everything from the science side of things. You're completely scientifically literate. Do you think that's really important, or do you think someone could come to it with just the law side of things?
Yeah, I mean, the job that I do, you have to have a scientific background, and you have to understand the science behind it, really. And that kind of comes to what I said about, you know, understanding why something is clever, not just what they've done. And in particular, the sort of requirement of patentability of showing that something is inventive. So generally in patenting, you've got to show that it's new because you're not allowed to reinvent the wheel. And it's got to be inventive because, you know, granting a monopoly on something that's trivial, a trivial improvement, just isn't good for third-party rights. And it's really that sort of inventiveness where you get to use the technological, your scientific background. And to be honest, it's where I, love it, because I've sort of alluded to the fact that my research career was fine but not glittering, but the people come to me with the results, and I get to sort of vicariously bask in their glory, without having to bang my head against the wall for months on end. And so, that's a good part of the job, in the sense that I can enjoy that, but also I get to delve into that technical side of it, and I get to understand it at a quite serious level, especially kind of if I'm having to do more contentious elements of the work.
I can imagine you get a few of those, especially in the medical sector.
Yeah, and it's where I sort of focus on these days in my career, and mostly defending people's rights. But yeah, it's a very niche part, a very niche business.
Yeah. So if I were a researcher and I was looking for an IP advisor, what would you tell me to do? How would I find one?
I think on the whole, in the UK at least, a lot of the IP advisors are really good on their science. There is a requirement that you have a good science degree, and I think a lot of them are very scientifically knowledgeable. I think, definitely ask them for experience of similar, work that they've done in technical areas. I actually think, though, that the most important thing is more a human thing. I definitely advocate working with someone that you get on with, and the process of patenting is quite time consuming. It's resource heavy. I think life is too short to work with people that you don't, that it's a chore to work with. And I've been extremely lucky that I've found quite a lot of clients who I get on with. And I used to beat myself up, or at least think, well, there's all this work that I'm capable of doing, so I should be doing all this, working with all these different people. But ultimately, I've come to the conclusion that I shouldn't be working with some people, because we're not a right fit in the sense of that kind of personal touch. And I put a lot of value on relationship building with clients, and getting to know them, and finding out their business needs, and that thankfully has developed into some really great client relationships. And still work, but it's nicer to work with people that you get on well with. So I think if you're looking for an advisor, have a call with them, with not just one, but lots of different advisors, and find what feels right for you. I think most people can sort of work out in half an hour call-ish whether this person's going to be the right person to work with or not. And I think that's an important thing, because quite a lot of IP advisors are good on the technical side. And so the difference is, does their style suit you? I'm very hands-on. I like to become an extension of their team, in a sense, not just an external advisor. But some people don't want that. Some people want to tell their advisor, this is what I want you to do. Don't ask awkward, difficult questions. Just get on with it. That's not me. And so if that's, if you're looking for someone hands-on, then you'll find a subset of IP advisors who do that. If you're looking for someone who's just going to go and do what they're told, then you'll find a subset of advisors like that. So yeah, I personally feel like that the human touch is the most important thing. But talk to them about the science as well, see how much they're into it as well.
I think that's really good advice, Joe. And thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure to hear about it from your perspective, and I'll see if I can identify any innovation that might have come through you first in the future.
Thanks, Harriet. It's been an absolute pleasure.